picture a mountain. Now, shrink it down in your mind.
Right, like a hill.
Yeah, exactly. Mount Waryong in Daegu, South Korea, is really just a large hill. It's barely 100 meters high. You can easily see the glow of the surrounding city lights right through the trees.
It's not exactly the deep wilderness.
No, not at all. So how do 5 nimble, street-smart, local grade schoolers just vanish from it without a single trace on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because, when you look at missing person cases, there's usually an expected trajectory.
Right. Someone vanishes, a search initiates, and eventually a puzzle piece turns up.
Yeah, the ambiguity, that suffocating space of not knowing. It's usually just a temporary state before the narrative finally closes, even if the outcome is tragic.
But the stack of sources we're diving into today completely shatters that expectation. We've got archival articles, detailed forensic analyses from some incredible Reddit threads, and comprehensive notes from a CNA Insider documentary.
And we are using all of that to look at one of South Korea's most notorious unresolved mysteries, the case of the Frog Boys.
Exactly. But the mission of this deep dive isn't just to, sift through a true crime puzzle. We really want to explore the profound emotional contrast between the simple, everyday childhood routine and the chilling, decades-long uncertainty that just consumed these families.
It's a really sobering look at how systems function or fail to function in a crisis.
Yeah. We're going to look closely at how rigid assumptions made by investigators clouded the search for the truth from literally the very first hour.
Because when we examine the timeline, we uncover a story about institutional psychology, the fragility of memory, and just the immense collateral damage inflicted when authorities lose their objectivity.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to establish the baseline of normalcy first, because that's what makes this whole event so disruptive.
Right, set the scene.
So it's March 26, 1991. It's a Tuesday, but the schools are closed. It's a temporary national holiday for the first local elections in 30 years.
So everyone's kind of relaxed, enjoying the day off.
Exactly. And you have these 5 boys aged 9 to 13, Cheol-won, Ho-yeon, Young-gyu, Chanin, and Jong-sik. In their neighborhood, they were affectionately known as the 5 Musketeers because they were just inseparable.
Closer than brothers, really.
Yeah. And they gather some basic supplies like tin cans and a few sticks, and they tell their families they're heading up Mount Waryong to hunt for salamander eggs in the local streams.
Which, I should mention, the moniker Frog Boys was actually an invention of the media later on.
Oh, right. Because of the frogs.
Yeah, the general public was just more familiar with frogs than salamanders, so it made for a catchier headline. But at its core, this is just a group of kids engaging in a completely mundane childhood adventure.
And there's this one detail in the sources that really anchors how fragile this routine was. There was actually a 6th boy.
Tae-ryong.
Yeah, Tae-ryong. He actually set out with the group that morning. They walked together right up to the entrance of the mountain's hiking trail.
But then he stops.
Right. Standing there, he suddenly remembers his mother's stern warning not to stray too far from the house. So he turns back to go eat breakfast.
Entirely unaware that he was narrowly stepping out of a timeline that would just swallow his friends.
It's chilling. That pivot points to how casually life just alters its course. So the 5 remaining boys proceed up the mountain. And as the afternoon wanes, 6:00 p.m. rolls around. The sun is setting.
And the boys aren't home for dinner.
Exactly. The parents know these kids. They know the area. They wouldn't just lose track of time in the dark. So they realize something is fundamentally wrong. By 7:50 p.m., the police are officially notified.
And what follows is an absolutely massive mobilization.
We're talking about a search grid with thousands of police officers, military soldiers, and citizen volunteers. They comb every inch of that hill.
And they find absolutely nothing.
Not a shoe, not a tin can, not a broken branch. When you think about the parents in those initial hours, it's like watching a glass fall off a table in slow motion.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
They are suspended in that terrifying split second before it shatters. Only the shattering takes years to arrive. Because logistically, it makes no sense. Like we said, Mount Waryong isn't an impenetrable wilderness.
What's fascinating here is how the earliest investigative assumptions completely shaped the trajectory of that massive search.
Right, the runaway theory.
Yeah, the police almost immediately labeled the 5 boys as runaways. And they didn't just lean toward this theory behind closed doors, they codified it. They printed thousands of official pamphlets using that specific terminology.
Which is just a staggering disconnect from reality. The parents actually went on national television to fiercely protest that label.
I mean, reasonably so.
Yeah, they're pointing out that 5 young boys with no money, no extra clothes, and deep ties to their families do not just orchestrate a collective, untraceable escape.
But that runaway label created this dangerous investigative filter. Think of it like adjusting a telescope so tightly onto one specific star that you completely miss the meteor heading right for your lens.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Because authorities frame this exclusively as truant children, they systematically discarded critical evidence pointing to foul play.
Like the classmate's testimony.
Exactly. There was a classmate, Sung-Hoon Ham, who lived near the foothills and was on the mountain that morning. He told police that right around 11:30 a.m., near a graveyard on the mountainside, he clearly heard 2 distinct screams.
Spaced about 10 seconds apart, right?
Yes. And if you correlate that testimony with the families, there's a very disturbing alignment. Right at that exact time, 2 of the mothers, Jung-sik's mother and Young-gi's mother, reported feeling a sudden physical, gut-sinking sensation.
But the police didn't elevate the classmate's testimony at all.
They dismissed it entirely. The runaway theory was the only accepted paradigm. When investigators filter witness accounts of screams or potential gunshots, through the assumption that kids were just hiding out in the city, the actual search stalls on day 1.
The physical dragnet was huge, but the intellectual inquiry was entirely misdirected, which creates a terrifying vacuum of answers. And we know from human psychology that when there is a void of verified facts, it gets filled rapidly.
With rumors, false leads, and just systemic dysfunction.
Yeah. The emotional toll of this vacuum on the families is incredibly heavy to read about. I mean, the fathers quit their jobs, they pooled their resources and bought a lorry.
And they covered the whole thing in photos of the boys.
Massive weatherproof photos. They spent years driving across South Korea, handing out flyers to anyone who would take one.
The psychological weight of a relentless, fruitless search like that fundamentally alters a person. One father became dependent on sleeping pills simply to endure the nights.
And another shared the torment of his sleep. He dreaded this recurring dream where his son was standing outside in the pouring rain.
Yeah, and then turning and walking away into the downpour without ever looking back. It's a state of perpetual unresolved mourning.
And then you layer upon that grief the absolute cruelty of false hope. They dealt with extortion calls demanding ransom for children the callers didn't even have.
It's sickening.
It gets worse. There was a moment on a live, nationwide television broadcast, a show called The Square of Public Opinions, where a prank caller managed to get through to the studio.
Oh, I read about this in the documentary notes.
Yeah, the caller pretended to be a sobbing Jong-sik. The entire country held its collective breath, genuinely believing a child had been found alive.
Only for it to be a cruel hoax.
Yeah.
But the dysfunction extended far beyond public cruelty. The systemic response from authorities started to view the families not as victims, but as nuisances,
Or
even potential liabilities.
Right. Intelligence agents began physically tailing the fathers, showing up unannounced at their homes, monitoring their interviews with journalists.
Which is just...
I cannot understand how an investigative system goes from searching for missing kids to actively turning its crosshairs on the grieving parents. Logically, how did they justify that leap, especially when the local community was quietly whispering about the military base nearby?
It comes down to a well-documented cognitive bias within criminal justice, especially during high-pressure, prolonged investigations. When an institution invests vast resources and comes up entirely empty, the sheer weight of public scrutiny is crushing.
So the system is desperate for a resolution.
Exactly. Enter Kim Gail-won, a criminal psychologist.
The guy who publicly accused Jong-sik's father of murdering the 5 boys and burying them under his own house.
Yes, and we really have to examine why this accusation was given any weight at all. Kim Gail-won was educated in the United States. In early 1990 South Korea, that specific academic credential carried a tremendous amount of unearned, almost unquestioned prestige among local authorities.
Even though his accusation was based on nothing more than a quote-unquote 3-hour gap in the father's alibi.
That's right. But his theory provided the police with a highly convenient out.
So convenient that they literally brought an excavator to the family's house. They demolished the bathroom, digging up the concrete foundation on live television.
Searching for 5 bodies based on one psychologist's speculative profile.
And they found absolutely nothing.
Because the psychological comfort of a localized domestic crime narrative is incredibly powerful for a failing institution. If a father cleverly hid the bodies under a bathroom floor, it means the police didn't fail their massive mountain search.
Right, it means the bodies were never on the mountain to begin with.
The system subconsciously prefers a horrific, intimate crime over admitting a total systemic breakdown. And the collateral damage was profound. Jong-sik's father, Kim Chil-go, died of liver cancer 5 years later.
The other families firmly believed that the immense stress and public humiliation of that unfounded accusation is what destroyed his health.
It's tragic.
The true tragedy was left buried on the mountain while the nation watched a bathroom get dismantled. But, the Earth rarely keeps its secrets forever, especially when people are looking for something else entirely.
Right. Fast forward 11 years.
It's September 2002. Two men are out foraging for acorns on Mount Waryong, and they stumble upon the remains of the 5 boys tangled together in the soil.
The geographical context of this discovery is vital. The remains were located in an area the police insisted had been meticulously searched multiple times.
And it was located only 100 to 200 meters from a military shooting range, the 50th Infantry Division's range, before it was moved in 1994.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting if we look at the physical mechanics of the investigation. After 11 years of a national mystery, you would logically expect the authorities to treat this location as the most delicate, heavily protected crime scene imaginable.
You would hope so.
Instead, the responding police officers used pickaxes.
I still can't believe that part.
They literally struck the ground with pickaxes, pulling skulls and long bones from the earth and piling them together haphazardly. It's like trying to perform delicate neurosurgery with a sledgehammer. They destroyed the very context of the site.
Because in forensic anthropology, the precise position and orientation of bones in the soil holds a critical physical record of the event. By aggressively excavating the remains and piling them up, the police erased an irreplaceable layer of evidence.
And then, highly respected forensic scientist Professor Chae Jong-min arrived to find the scene stripped of its contextual integrity.
And the police already had a narrative prepared for the press.
Oh, yeah. They announced that the boys died of hypothermia.
Which is baffling.
They suggested the children got lost, huddled together for warmth, and succumbed to the elements. They even pointed to the boys' clothing, noting the sleeves were tied into complex industrial-style knots, and claimed this was the result of paradoxical undressing.
To understand the physical impossibility of that narrative, we have to examine the physiological mechanism of paradoxical undressing. When a human body enters the final stages of severe hypothermia, the blood vessels in the extremities constrict tightly to keep warm blood near the vital organs.
Okay, makes sense.
But as the person nears death, the muscles controlling those vessels become utterly exhausted and fail. The vessels suddenly dilate, sending a rapid rush of warm blood back to the skin.
So they feel hot.
Exactly. The dying brain misinterprets this sudden rush as intense, burning heat, causing the freezing person to desperately strip off their clothes.
So the police are arguing that 5 local kids who knew the terrain intimately got completely lost on a hill where they could literally see the glow of city lights.
Right.
Then, they all experienced this rare end-stage hypothermic reaction simultaneously, and somehow used their rapidly fading energy to tie complex knots in their sleeves.
It is physiologically incompatible. A person loses fine motor skills long before they lose consciousness in freezing conditions. Tying tight, complex knots while experiencing terminal paradoxical undressing is not medically feasible.
Plus, local rescue teams from the Alpine Federation immediately pointed out that kids that age could easily navigate down the mountain in the dark. They could have reached home in under 10 minutes.
But the physical mechanics of the bones themselves provided the most definitive refutation.
Right.
This raises an important question. What does taphonomy tell us about the scene?
Taphonomy being the study of how organisms decay.
Yes, it's the science of what happens after death. Professor Chae pointed out a fundamental taphonomic fact. If 5 bodies succumb to exposure on the surface of a mountain, scavengers, insect activity, and weather systems will scatter their bones across a wide radius over the course of 11 years.
But these bones were not scattered.
No, they were tightly clustered. They were meticulously buried. As Professor Chae calmly observed, the physical evidence did not point to a tragic accident in nature. It pointed to a covered-up crime.
Because the police couldn't hide everything with their pickaxes. Bones hold a physical record that even a botched excavation cannot completely erase.
Right. Once the forensic experts secured the remains and examined them in the laboratory, the reality became undeniable.
Let's talk about what they found.
The forensic examination revealed blunt force trauma on 3 of the skulls. 2 of the skulls contained traces of blood. And most significantly, experts identified suspected bullet holes in the skulls, potentially originating from a shotgun or an M16 rifle.
And those knots that the police tried to explain away with hypothermia. When experts analyzed the clothing, they found that one boy's garments were turned completely inside out, a technique often used to create an impromptu blindfold.
And the complex knots were not the result of frantic freezing hands. They were deliberately tied to secure empty bullet cartridges and unused bullets hidden within the fabric.
Which is just wow. These forensic details really lend weight to the most prominent investigative theory out there, the one analyzed by both local observers and the digital forensic communities on Reddit.
Right. Remember, March 26 was a public holiday. The regular military troops had the day off.
But commissioned officers were permitted to utilize the nearby shooting range for individual practice during their free time.
Yes, the theory suggests that the boys, who were known in their neighborhood to occasionally collect empty bullet casings as a hobby, were sneaking around the perimeter of the range.
And during this time, an officer or multiple officers practicing their aim accidentally shot one or two of the children.
From that point, the theory outlines a horrific psychological escalation. Faced with the reality of killing local children and the severe consequences of a military court-martial, the officer panics.
So, to eliminate the remaining witnesses, they brutally beat the surviving boys to silence them, and then rapidly bury the bodies to conceal the incident. I always look at the logistics of a scenario like that. If you are an adult, even an armed one, how do you manage to overpower 5 nimble grade schoolers in an open forest environment? Why wouldn't the boys just scatter in different directions?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human survival psychology, we really have to look at how the central nervous system responds to a sudden, catastrophic threat. We often evaluate these situations using logic from a place of safety. We expect a coordinated retreat.
Right, the flight in fight or flight.
But the sudden discharge of a firearm radically alters the power dynamic. It isn't just a matter of physical speed, it's about paralyzing, overriding fear.
The physiological freeze response.
Precisely. If a child suddenly witnesses a friend being shot, their cognitive processing is instantly overwhelmed. Compliance out of absolute terror is far more common than organized flight.
They likely just remain frozen in place.
Yeah. They may have even believed the adult authority figures were going to provide medical help to their injured friend, right up until the blunt force trauma commenced.
That is deeply upsetting to think about. It's important to note the official stances here, too. The military categorically denied any involvement. They held press conferences to insist there were no drills or activities that day.
And the police investigation never formally implicated the military base in their official findings either.
Even though the undeniable physical evidence of bullets and blunt force trauma exists alongside the undeniable geographical proximity to the base.
But the certainty of who pulled the trigger or who swung the weapon remains obscured, mostly because the initial investigation failed so profoundly to preserve the scene or follow the early auditory evidence of those screams.
And that institutional failure is compounded by the legal architecture of the time. In 1991, South Korea had a 15-year statute of limitations for murder.
Which expired in 2006.
Right. And even though the country eventually abolished the statute of limitations for first-degree murder in 2015, the change wasn't applied retroactively in a way that would allow prosecution for this case.
The legal window definitively closed.
Which brings our focus squarely back to the families. They're left with a truth they can scientifically deduce, but a justice they can never legally execute.
In 2004, 2 years after the remains were discovered and analyzed in a hospital morgue, the parents were finally able to hold a funeral.
The hearse was completely covered in thousands of donated chrysanthemums. It was the symbol from a public that had finally grasped the sheer magnitude of the systemic failure and the family's grief.
The families took the boys' ashes to the Nakdong River. They scattered them into the water, expressing a hope that the 5 friends could flow out into the Pacific Ocean and remain together in whatever comes next.
There's a quote from Woo Jong-yu, the father of Cheol-won, that it captures the permanent architecture of this kind of loss. He stated, "It's said that when your parents die, you bury them in the ground. But when your children die, you bury them in your heart."
That's incredibly powerful.
He explained that he thought seeing his son's physical remains return to dust would somehow help him forget, but the ache of the missing only intensified.
Because the closure they were promised by the system never arrived.
Exactly. So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive by looking at how the discovery of physical evidence usually provides a resolution to the unknown. But in this case, the mountain yielded the physical bodies while maintaining an oppressive silence about the events. It left a jagged, permanent scar on the community.
It demands that we reflect on how institutional pride and cognitive bias can actively obstruct the search for reality. When the very systems society relies upon for clarity and protection, the police, the military, the academic experts are the ones initiating the most damaging assumptions, we have to examine the architecture of those institutions.
Yeah.
Is a system designed to solve a mystery, or is it subconsciously designed to protect its own reputation from the implications of the answers?
That's something I want you, the listener, to think about. Think about how you process information when the official narrative seems just a little too simple. Sometimes the authorities meant to meticulously unearth the truth are the ones wielding the pickaxes.
Keep looking closely at the systems around you.
And keep asking the hard questions. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Frog Boys. We'll see you next time.